Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into the story of The Last Airbender, I'd love to know where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical, seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up. Let's begin. In the quiet folds of memory, there lives a boy who carried the weight of the world upon his shoulders, even before he was ready to understand its meaning. His name was Aang, the Last Airbender, the final child of a people who once soared freely on currents of wind and laughter. His story begins not with battles or fire, but with the gentleness of a monastery high among the clouds, where bells chimed softly in the wind, and the scent of incense floated like whispers through open halls. Aang belonged to the Air Nomads, a people of simplicity, playfulness, and harmony. They were wanderers at heart, traveling with the winds, guided by a love of freedom that no chain could restrain. The monks raised their children in temples, perched on mountaintops, where the sky stretched endlessly, and bison with 6 legs drifted through the clouds as if they were a part of the heavens themselves. It was a world where joy and spirituality blended, where laughter was as sacred as prayer. Among these nomads, Aang was different. He was chosen. Born at a time when the Avatar cycle pointed to the Air Nomads, he was marked as the Avatar, the bridge between worlds, the one soul who could master all 4 elements: air, water, earth, and fire. But Aang was just a boy. He had the heart of a child, curious and playful, with eyes that looked for games rather than thrones. His destiny was too large, too heavy, and it came to him far too soon. Monk Gyatso was the gentle hand that steadied him. Gyatso was more than a teacher. He was a father figure, a friend, and a reminder that love should always come before duty. The old monk baked pies that filled the temple with warmth, and played tricks that made Aang giggle until his stomach ached. When the burden of being the Avatar weighed upon the boy, Gyatso's kindness reminded him that he was still a child, still allowed to laugh, still allowed to fly on the back of his beloved bison, Appa, without the world demanding so much. But even in that joyful place, shadows stretched longer each year. The Fire Nation's ambition burned across the world, and whispers of war carried through every corner. When the other monks decided that Aang must learn of his role earlier than tradition allowed, it was as though they pulled away the last layer of innocence he had left. He was told he was the Avatar at just 12 years old, a revelation that filled him not with pride, but with fear. He was not ready. He wanted friends, games, and moments of lightness, not the endless responsibility of keeping balance in a fractured world. And so came the storm. Aang, frightened by the weight placed upon him, took Appa and fled into the skies. The winds howled, and the ocean roared, and boy and bison were swallowed whole by the sea's fury. In that desperate moment, instinct and destiny intertwined. The Avatar state, a surge of power that connected him to all who came before, encased him and Appa in a sphere of ice. Time itself froze around him. The world spun onward, decades passed, nations fought, people suffered. But Aang remained untouched, sleeping beneath the ice, a boy held in stillness while his people vanished. When at last the ice cracked, it was not the monks who woke him, nor the bison who nudged him awake. It was 2 siblings from the southern water tribe, Katara and Sokka, who found him, glowing faintly in his frozen tomb. As the light of the Avatar seeped back into the world, the boy with arrowed tattoos opened his eyes to a future he did not recognize, a time where laughter was rare and peace was only a memory. He had gone to sleep a child of the Air Nomads. He woke as the last of them. And so began Aang's journey, a journey not of conquest, but of healing. He would carry the voices of the wind within him, even though the temples were silent. He would laugh again, even though grief pressed against his heart. And above all, he would learn that balance was not only a matter of bending elements, but of bending one's own spirit toward compassion, forgiveness, and hope. When Aang stepped out of the iceberg, the world felt both familiar and strange. The air still rushed around him like an old friend, lifting the edges of his robes and carrying his laughter into the open sky. Yet beneath that laughter, there was an emptiness he could not name. Katara and Sokka looked at him with a mixture of awe and confusion, their tribe too small and weary to imagine that this child could be anything more than another survivor of the endless war. They saw in him hope, though they did not yet know how deep that hope would run. Appa, his flying bison, groaned and stretched his wings beside him, the only piece of the old world that had followed Aang into the new. Together they carried Katara and Sokka northward, skimming across frozen seas and white-capped icebergs. For Aang, each gust of wind was a reminder that some things had not changed. The sky was still open, still boundless, still waiting for him to leap into it. Yet the silence of the air temples weighed heavy in his heart. He did not yet know what had become of his people. In time he would learn. The southern air temple, once alive with bells, prayers, and playful monks, stood in ruins when Aang returned. What he found there was not the warmth of Gyatso's smile, but the cold truth of bones. The Fire Nation had struck decades before, and with them had ended the line of Air Nomads. Aang, in his grief, collapsed into the Avatar state, that fierce flood of power that connected him to all his past lives. The earth cracked, winds tore through the valley, and light blazed from his eyes and tattoos. Katara was the one who brought him back, her voice cutting through the storm of his sorrow. In her compassion, he found an anchor. In her promise, he found the first piece of a new family. This was the beginning of his true awakening. Though his people were gone, their spirit lived within him. Gyatso's kindness echoed in the way he cared for others. The Air Nomad's joy lingered in his laughter, in the way he chased penguins on the ice and slid down hills as though the world were still a playground. And though he had every reason to close his heart, Aang opened it wider, inviting new friends to take the place of those he had lost. Katara became his guide in waterbending, patient and nurturing, a mirror of the mother he never had. Sokka, with his stubborn humor and sharp wit, became a brother, teasing Aang yet protecting him with a loyalty that deepened with each trial. Later, Toph would join them, grounding Aang with her strength and reminding him that even the blind could see the truth more clearly than those with open eyes. Together they would form Team Avatar, but in these early steps, it was enough that Aang was not alone. Still, the mission pressed upon him. The Avatar was meant to master all four elements and bring balance to the world. But Aang was a child. His heart longed for peace without war, laughter without sorrow. He feared fire not only for the pain it could cause, but for the memory of flames that had taken everything from him. And yet destiny called. Every village he passed, every frightened face he saw, reminded him that he was the bridge, the one who could mend what had been broken. The journey ahead stretched far and uncertain. The Fire Nation's shadow reached into every corner, and their prince, Zuko, pursued him relentlessly, believing that capturing the Avatar would restore his lost honor. But even when chased, Aang did not lose the gentle playfulness that defined him. He rode the winds with joy, showing Katara and Sokka the sky from Appa's back, teaching them that wonder could survive even in the darkest times. Every night as he lay beneath the stars, Aang felt the weight of absence. He would close his eyes and remember the temple bells, Yatso's laughter, the way the monks filled their days with meditation and games. Then he would open his eyes to the present, a campfire shared with new friends, the quiet breath of Appa beside him, the sound of waves against the shore. Slowly he began to understand. The Air Nomads were gone, but their spirit was not. It lived in him, and it lived in the bonds he now formed. His journey was only beginning. The world had forgotten his people, but through him they would be remembered. Through his choices their values would shine again. Freedom, peace, and kindness carried on the wind. And though the path to balance was long, Aang walked it with bare feet, a smile, and the quiet strength of a boy who had slept for 100 years and awoken to heal the world. As the seasons turned in his journey, Aang's lightness of spirit carried him through places where fear and doubt might have rooted themselves too deeply in another soul. The boy who had slept 100 years awoke not bitter, not hardened, but open to wonder. He marveled at the smallest things, the way snow sparkled under the moon, the laughter of children who had never seen an airbender twist the wind into playful dances, or the gentle rhythm of waves lapping against the hull of a boat. For Aang, every village and every person was an opportunity to share joy. Though the war had touched every corner of the world, he approached it not with a soldier's sternness, but with a child's curiosity. In one town, he taught children how to spin on air scooters, circling around him in laughter. In another, he listened to elders tell stories of the days before the Fire Nation's shadow, his bright eyes carrying their words as if he were a vessel for memory itself. Even when chased by firebenders or tested by dangers, Aang's first instinct was not to fight, but to reach out, to connect. And yet beneath the laughter and play, his heart carried an ache that never fully quieted. He had no family to return to, no homeland to protect. The Air Nomads were gone, their temples standing as hollow monuments to a way of life extinguished. At times, the silence of those sacred halls would press down upon him, and he would feel the weight of his solitude. But even then, Aang's spirit found ways to transform grief into gentleness. Where others might close themselves off, he opened himself more fully. His compassion grew deeper because he knew what it was to lose. The bond he shared with Appa was a thread that tied him back to that vanished world. Appa was not just the bison, but family, the last living piece of the life Aang once knew. Together they soared above clouds, and when Aang felt overwhelmed, he would rest his forehead against Appa's warm fur, breathing in the comfort of a friendship that stretched beyond words. Momo, too, became a part of this circle of companionship, a creature small and playful, who reminded Aang that even the simplest joys were worth treasuring. With each step of his journey, the Avatar's responsibility grew clearer. He was not only a boy carried forward from another age, he was the hope of this one. Villages whispered his name with reverence, and elders bowed to him, though he wished they would not. Aang never sought power or worship. He wanted only to help, to mend the tears war had left in the fabric of the world. His challenge was not to destroy, but to restore. There were moments when the weight threatened to break him, when enemies pressed too closely, or when the shadows of his own fear crept in. The Avatar state returned with its overwhelming force. It was a power vast and ancient, yet it frightened Aang, for within it, he lost himself his laughter, his gentleness, replaced by the voices of countless past lives. He carried them all, yet he feared becoming lost in their storm. It was Katara again and again who helped draw him back. Her calm presence, her steady hands, reminded him that even the Avatar was still human, still a boy learning how to walk the path laid before him. Despite the turmoil, Aang never lost sight of what mattered most to him. He sought peace not through domination, but through understanding. Where others prepared armies, he sought teachers. Water from the tribes, earth from the kingdoms, fire, though feared, awaited him too. To Aang, mastery was not conquest. It was harmony, weaving together all the elements as threads of the same cloth. Each night, when he gazed at the stars, Aang felt both the loneliness of being the last and the wonder of being part of something eternal. The constellations were the same ones his people had watched, the same ones Gyatso had pointed out long ago, and though the temples lay in ruins, he knew the spirit of the Air Nomads drifted still, carried by the winds that rushed across mountaintops, the winds he now called his own. His journey was one of awakening not only to his powers, but to the truth that even the smallest act of kindness could heal wounds deeper than any scar. He was, after all, not simply the Avatar. He was Aang, a boy with laughter in his heart, arrows on his skin, and the will to carry his people's legacy into a world that had nearly forgotten it. As Aang's path stretched onward, he began to see that being the Avatar was not only about bending the elements, but also about bending hearts toward understanding. Every choice he made rippled outward, touching lives in ways both small and vast. Sometimes it was as simple as helping a village find clean water, or guiding frightened children to safety. Other times, it was in standing against injustice, not with anger, but with patience and creativity. He was a boy who turned obstacles into games, who transformed fear into laughter, and in doing so, he reminded the world of something it had long forgotten, that gentleness itself could be powerful. His bond with Katara deepened as they traveled. She was a steady reminder that loss could become strength. Far in the southern reaches of the world, where the ocean meets endless fields of ice, life clings quietly to the snow. The Southern Water Tribe is small and humble. Its people bound together not by wealth or power, but by warmth, by shared survival in the frozen wilderness. It is here that two siblings, Katara and Sokka, first stepped into the path of destiny, carrying the heart of their tribe within them, and carrying within their own hearts the strength of family. Katara was the last waterbender of the Southern tribe. Her gift was not only in bending water to her will, but in the way her compassion flowed into everything she touched. From childhood, she had been drawn to healing, to nurturing, to finding balance in places where others saw only loss. She wore her grief quietly, for her mother had been taken by the Fire Nation when she was still a child. That loss left her with both sorrow and resolve, a longing to protect those she loved, and a determination to keep her people's traditions alive. Sokka, her older brother, bore his burdens differently. He had no bending, no spiritual gift, yet he carried a sharp mind and a brave heart. With humor as his shield and wit as his sword, Sokka grew into a leader even before he realized it. His role in the tribe had always been to protect, to watch over the younger ones when their father, Hakoda, sailed north to fight in the war. Sokka's jokes might have seemed light-hearted, but beneath them rested a fierce loyalty. He was the one who sharpened weapons, who stood watch at night, who promised himself that his sister would never face the Fire Nation alone. Their world was small, igloos of snow, fishing boats bobbing against the icy waves, seals swimming between glaciers. The war had taken much from them, fathers sent to fight, mothers left to grieve, children learning too early about survival. And yet, in that frozen corner of the world, there was still resilience. There was still laughter, sparked by Sokka's antics, and still hope, carried in Katara's quiet faith. When Aang emerged from the iceberg, glowing with light and carrying a forgotten past upon his shoulders, it was Katara and Sokka who reached out to him first. Katara saw not only a boy, but a kindred soul, someone who also carried loss, someone who needed friendship as much as guidance. Sokka, though skeptical at first, came to see in Aang not just a burden but a companion, someone who brought adventure into their quiet, frozen lives. In joining him, they stepped beyond the borders of their icy home and into a wider world. Together, the siblings carried the heart of the southern tribe into every place they traveled. Katara's kindness softened hardened faces, reminding villages that compassion had not vanished. Her water-bending grew stronger with each lesson, flowing like a river toward mastery. What began as simple control over small streams became, over time, the ability to summon tides, to heal wounds, to bend the very lifeblood of the world. Through her, the southern tribe's spirit blossomed again. Sokka, though often the one to trip or stumble in his plans, grew into a strategist whose mind shaped battles and victories. He was a warrior without bending, yet with creativity sharper than any blade. His humor kept spirits alive when the weight of war pressed too heavily, and while others dismissed him as a joker, time proved that his courage and cleverness were as essential as any bending skill. The water tribe's strength was never in numbers. It was in bonds. It was in the way Katara and Sokka stood by one another, even in moments of doubt. It was in the way they welcomed Aang into their circle, making him not just a friend but family. The heart of the tribe was not in ice or snow, but in love for each other, for their people, for the dream of peace that had carried them through generations of hardship. Beyond the quiet resilience of the southern water tribe lay another story, waiting further north, where the ice stretched into towering walls and palaces carved from frozen rivers. The northern water tribe was larger, grander, a city where bending was not just survival but art, practiced and perfected across centuries. It was here that Aang, Katara, and Sokka first witnessed a reflection of what the water tribes once were before the Fire Nation's cruelty had scattered and diminished them. In the northern tribe, Katara's gift found its true path. Under the stern gaze of Master Pakku, she was tested not only in skill but in spirit. Pakku at first dismissed her, bound by the old traditions that forbade women from learning the art of combat waterbending. To him, Katara was meant only to heal. But Katara's resolve was stronger than ice, and when she challenged him, she carried not just her own determination, but the voice of every girl who had been told she could not. Their duel was fierce, and though she was outmatched, her courage cracked through centuries of rigidity. In time, even Pakku's heart softened, and he bowed to the truth that the strength of water was not confined to rules, but lived in the spirit of those who bent it. For Sokka, the northern tribe carried a different lesson, one etched not in combat but in love. It was here that he met Princess Yue, a girl with hair like moonlight and eyes filled with quiet grace. Yue was kind and gentle, yet bound by duty to her people, her life shaped by the responsibility of her crown. Sokka's humor, his awkward bravery, touched her heart in ways she had not expected, and in their brief time together, a bond bloomed as fragile and luminous as the moon itself. But Yue carried a secret, a burden as heavy as the northern ice. As a child, she had been born weak, her life fading even before it began. It was the moon spirit who saved her, gifting her a second chance, a breath of life borrowed from something greater. That gift, however, meant her destiny was forever tied to the moon. When the Fire Nation's Admiral Zhao struck against the spirit world, and the moon's spirit was slain, Yue knew what must be done. In her final moments, she embraced Sokka with eyes full of sorrow and strength, and gave herself back to the spirit who had once saved her. She became the moon itself, ascending into the night sky, watching forever over her people. For Sokka, the loss was piercing. He had found love in the midst of war, only to lose it to duty and sacrifice. Yet even in grief, he honored Yue's memory by carrying her spirit forward in his courage. Her light never left him, and in the quiet of night, when he looked up at the glowing moon, he felt her presence watching over him. These experiences wove deeply into the siblings' journey. Katara's growth under Master Pakku transformed her from a novice into a true waterbender, capable of standing alongside the strongest warriors. Sokka's love and loss deepened his heart, tempering his humor with a newfound understanding of duty and sacrifice. Together, their time in the Northern Water Tribe reminded them that their identity as Water Tribe children was not just about where they were born, but about the values they carried: loyalty, resilience, and the willingness to give everything for those they loved. And through it all, the Water Tribes, north and south, different in size and custom, were united by the same current. They were peoples shaped by the sea and snow, by tides that rose and fell, by the moon that guided their nights. The heart of the Water Tribe was not only in bending water, but in bending with life itself, adapting, enduring, and flowing forward even after the harshest storms. Back in the south, the heart of the Water Tribe was not only carried by Katara and Sokka, but also by the memory of their father, Hakoda. To them, he was more than a leader. He was a symbol of the courage their small tribe drew strength from. Hakoda had left years before, sailing across dangerous seas with the other men to fight in the war against the Fire Nation. His absence weighed heavily on Katara and Sokka. For Katara, he was the figure she missed most in her quiet moments, a reminder of love and protection she longed for. For Sokka, his father was the model he wanted to live up to: a warrior, a protector, a man who carried responsibility without faltering. When at last they were reunited, the meeting was tender and powerful. Hakoda embraced his children not as warriors, but as his son and daughter, his pride shining through his tired eyes. Sokka, often so eager to prove himself, found that he did not need to. His father already saw the strength in him. Katara, whose compassion had guided their journey, felt her father's steady presence like the warmth of a fire in the snow. Their reunion was a reminder that even across oceans and years of absence, the bond of family endured unbroken and unwavering. Yet the Water Tribe's story was not just one of leaders and warriors, but of those who carried quieter forms of strength. Gran, Katara, and Sokka's grandmother remained in the southern tribe after the men left, tending to the children and teaching the old ways. She was gentle and wise, her stories weaving the threads of history and hope that kept her people strong. To Katara, Gran was a guide, a voice of calm when the world felt too large. To Sokka, she was comfort, a reminder that home was more than a place, it was people. The resilience of the Water Tribes came not from bending alone, but from this spirit of togetherness. They survived because they held on to one another, because they believed that even against fire and steel, love and loyalty were a force just as unshakable. It was this bond that Katara and Sokka carried with them wherever they traveled. Katara's role as healer, not just of wounds but of spirits, reflected the nurturing essence of her people. She was the steady current that soothed, the gentle tide that lifted others when they faltered. Sokka, though without bending, embodied the ingenuity of the water tribe. His boomerang, his wit, his quick thinking, all were the tools of a people who had learned to survive in harsh conditions. Together, they represented the soul of their tribe, adaptable, courageous, and deeply tied to one another. Even Appa and Momo, Aang's animal companions, felt the warmth of the water tribe when they traveled with Katara and Sokka. Where the icy winds bit, Katara's care softened the journey. Where battles loomed, Sokka's planning and laughter gave them courage. The siblings were, in many ways, the heart of Team Avatar itself, grounding Aang when the weight of being the last airbender felt too heavy. And so, the story of the Water Tribe is not simply a tale of warriors, princesses, and bending masters. It is the story of a family of siblings who leaned on each other, of a father who returned, of a grandmother who kept the fire burning, and of a people who endured every loss without losing their kindness. The waters of the world may change their form, freezing into ice or flowing freely in rivers, but they always move forward. So too did the water tribes, carrying their spirit into every corner of the world. As Aang's journey unfolded, the presence of the water tribe within Team Avatar grew into something greater than the icy shores they had left behind. The lessons Katara and Sokka carried from their home became threads woven into the fate of the world. Through them, the water tribe's heart beat within every step of the Avatar's path. Katara's growth as a waterbender was not just a story of skill, but of responsibility. With each battle and every healing touch, she showed the world that bending was more than power, it was service. She tended to the wounded, soothed friends in despair, and used her bending not only to defend but to restore. This gift of healing, passed down in whispers and traditions of her people, reminded everyone that strength is not always measured by what one destroys, but by what one saves. Even in the fiercest moments of battle, Katara embodied the moonlit calm of the water tribe, proving gentleness could exist beside determination. Sokka, without bending, carried a different kind of influence. His humor often lightened the darkest nights, giving his companions a reason to smile when the weight of war pressed heavily on them. But behind his jokes lay strategy and intelligence, qualities that turned him into a leader in his own right. He crafted plans, built inventions, and inspired trust in others, showing that one did not need bending to shape destiny. Sokka's presence was proof that the water tribe's resilience was not bound to bending alone, but lived in the ingenuity of its people. Together, the siblings became Aang's anchors. Katara, with her nurturing spirit, reminded him of kindness and hope. Sokka, with his quick mind and bravery, gave him reason to keep moving forward. In moments when Aang doubted himself, when the burden of being the last airbender felt too heavy, the presence of these two children from the frozen south brought him comfort. Through them, he remembered that even the smallest tribe could shape the world's balance. The legacy of the water tribe extended beyond them. In the spirits of the north, Yue watched over the night skies, her light forever a guide to those who wandered in darkness. In the south, Gran and the others kept the flame of survival alive, waiting for peace to return. Across every ocean, their people carried the knowledge that water always finds a way, carving through stone, nourishing life, and reflecting the light of the moon. And when the great battles arrived, when nations collided, and the future trembled on the edge of destruction, the water tribe's strength could be seen not in the roar of armies, but in the quiet determination of its children. Katara and Sokka stood not as rulers or conquerors, but as a brother and sister who carried the love of their family, the wisdom of their tribe, and the unbreakable flow of water within their hearts. For in the end, the Water Tribe's greatest gift was not bending, nor war, nor even victory. It was the reminder that home lives in people, in the laughter shared on icy shores, in the warmth of family around a fire, in the stories passed down through generations. No matter how far they traveled or how heavy the world's burden became, Katara and Sokka carried that home with them. And through them, the Water Tribe's heart continued to beat strong, steady, and eternal like the tide. If water flowed and air drifted, then earth remained steady, firm beneath every step, silent in its strength, waiting to be noticed. Among Aang's companions, none embodied the spirit more than Toph, a girl whose sightless eyes revealed more of the world than most would ever see. Toph's life began in comfort, wrapped in silk and guarded by wealth. Her parents, noble and protective, saw her blindness as a weakness, something to be sheltered, hidden away from the world. They placed walls around her, believing safety meant stillness. Yet Toph was never still. Beneath her bare feet, the vibrations of the earth told stories no eyes could see, the shuffle of footsteps, the hum of insects, the steady heartbeat of the ground itself. In this language of stone and soil, she discovered freedom. Secretly, she learned from the world around her. The badger moles, ancient and gentle creatures who were themselves blind, became her teachers. They showed her how to listen with her feet, to let the earth speak through the tremors it carried. From them she learned not only how to bend stone, but how to truly connect with it, to feel its patience, its solidity, its quiet power. By the time she met Aang, Toph had already grown into a master, small in stature but unshakable in spirit. She carried herself with a confidence that startled those who expected fragility. Where her parents saw weakness, she knew strength. Where others hesitated, she stood firm. She joined the Avatar not as a follower, but as a teacher, shaping Aang's earthbending with her blunt honesty and fierce determination. Her style was direct, forceful, and unyielding, the very essence of the element she commanded. Yet beneath her hardened words and bold laughter, there was a tenderness Toph rarely showed. She teased her friends relentlessly, hiding her affection in playful jabs. She refused to admit vulnerability, building walls as sturdy as the stone she bent. But in quiet moments, when the campfire crackled low and the night grew still, the bond she shared with her companions became clear. They were more than teammates. They were the family she had longed for, one that saw her not as fragile, but as whole. Her gift to Aang was more than technique. She taught him what it meant to stand firm, to hold ground even when everything else seemed to push him back. She showed him that sometimes the world does not need flowing or drifting. It needs stillness, rooted strength, and the courage to stand unmovable. In her lessons, Aang discovered not just the art of earthbending, but the deeper truth of balance. Toph's journey was not alone. Other voices of Earth joined the Avatar's path, each with their own flavor of strength. One such presence was King Bumi of Omashu, an old friend of Aang's from 100 years past. Where Toph's mastery was sharp and young, Bumi's was ancient and wise, though wrapped in the eccentricities of a man who laughed as easily as he fought. Bumi ruled with unpredictability, teaching Aang that strength did not always wear the mask of seriousness. Oh, in his crooked smile and playful riddles, there was a reminder that joy and wisdom often walked hand in hand. Together, Toph and Bumi embodied the spirit of Earth, steady yet surprising, unyielding yet playful. They showed that the ground beneath one's feet was not simply lifeless stone, but a companion, a force with its own rhythm and heart. Beyond the rocky ridges of Omashu, and the silent whispers of badger moles lay another kind of earthbound strength, one carried not by bending, but by discipline, loyalty, and courage. On Kyoshi Island, Aang and his friends discovered the Kyoshi Warriors, an all-female order dedicated to protecting their home in the spirit of Avatar Kyoshi herself. At their head was Suki, a warrior whose quiet determination shone brighter than steel. Suki wore her painted mask with pride, the colors of her uniform symbolizing not just tradition, but unity with the land she protected. Unlike Bender's, her power came from years of training the discipline of movement, the sharpness of her fans, and the unshakable courage to defend what she loved. To meet her in battle was to meet the precision of Earth itself striking swiftly, never yielding ground. When Aang and his friends first crossed paths with her, Suki's strength was a revelation to Sokka. At the time, he carried the burden of his tribe's absence, struggling with what it meant to protect others while feeling inadequate beside bending masters. In his clumsy attempts to prove himself, he underestimated Suki. Yet she taught him a lesson as firm as stone that respect is earned, not through pride, but through humility. When Sokka opened himself to learning, Suki guided him patiently, showing him that even without bending, one could stand tall, confident, and unshakable. Their bond grew quietly, like roots weaving unseen beneath the earth. Sokka admired her bravery, her kindness, and the way she carried herself with dignity. Suki, in turn, saw in Sokka a heart that was honest, even if uncertain. Together, their companionship blossomed into love, not dramatic or sudden, but steady, grounded, the kind of love that could weather storms. The Kyoshi warriors themselves were more than a fighting force. They were a legacy. They honored the memory of Avatar Kyoshi, who had once walked the earth with towering presence and fierce justice. Through their discipline, they reminded the world that bending was not the only path to strength. Just as the earth could be shaped with patience and resolve, so too could people forge themselves into warriors through devotion and will. Suki's journey took her far from Kyoshi Island. She traveled alongside Team Avatar, fought in battles that shaped nations, and even endured the cruel walls of imprisonment when the Fire Nation captured her. Yet in every trial, she stood tall. Her spirit was like the mountains, sometimes battered by wind and rain, but never broken. Through Suki, the theme of Earth grew broader. She embodied the idea that strength is not limited to bending, but can live in discipline, unity, and love. When she stood at Sokka's side, when she fought beside Aang and Katara, she brought with her not just skill, but the grounded wisdom of her people. She reminded them all that while the skies may shift and waters may flow, it is the steady earth beneath their feet that gives them a place to stand. And so, in Toph's raw mastery, Bumi's eccentric wisdom, and Suki's graceful discipline, the Avatar found a circle of teachers and allies who revealed Earth's many faces. Each one showed that the element was not only stone and soil, but perseverance, loyalty, and the courage to stand firm no matter how fierce the storm. For Toph, joining Team Avatar was more than an escape from her sheltered life. It was a chance to carve her own path. She had spent her childhood hidden behind gates, her parents convinced she was fragile, someone to be protected rather than celebrated. The weight of those expectations pressed on her like stone walls, suffocating the freedom she longed for. Yet on the road with Aang, Katara, and Sokka, those walls crumbled. At last, she was not the Beifong family's hidden daughter, but Toph, an earthbender, a teacher, a friend. Her relationships with the group carried their own unique rhythms. With Katara, she found both friction and kinship. Katara's nurturing nature often clashed with Toph's fierce independence, sparking arguments that echoed like stones clashing in a river. Yet beneath the tension lay respect. Katara admired Toph's raw strength, while Toph recognized the quiet power in Katara's compassion. Like water and earth, their differences balanced one another, shaping a friendship that, though sometimes stormy, was unbreakable. With Sokka, Toph discovered a bond of laughter and trust. His humor drew out her playfulness, while her blunt honesty matched his wit. They teased each other, sharing jokes that lightened the weight of their journey. Yet when danger arose, Sokka's loyalty reminded Toph of the importance of connection, and Toph's unshakable spirit reassured Sokka that even in the face of fire and shadow, they would endure together. And with Aang, the relationship was something deeper, the connection between student and teacher. To the young Avatar, earthbending was the most difficult element to learn. Unlike air, which was light and free, or water, which flowed with movement, earth demanded stillness, patience, and absolute resolve. It was about planting one's feet, refusing to be moved. This went against Aang's nature. His instinct was always to evade, to avoid, to seek peace without confrontation. Toph's lessons were not gentle. She pushed him, challenged him, and at times seemed harsh. But through her, Aang learned what it meant to face obstacles head-on, to stand firm even when everything in him wanted to flee. In many ways, Toph was not just teaching Aang earthbending, she was teaching him resilience. She reminded him that the Avatar's duty was not always to flow around problems or rise above them, but sometimes to confront them directly with strength and certainty. This lesson would follow him into every battle, grounding him when the storm of responsibility threatened to sweep him away. Toph herself grew in return. Traveling with the group revealed sides of her she had never allowed herself to explore. Beneath her bravado, she discovered the warmth of belonging, the comfort of being accepted without question. She learned that showing strength did not mean hiding vulnerability, and that family could be chosen as much as it could be born. Though she often rolled her eyes at displays of affection, the truth was clear in her laughter, her loyalty, and the way she stood beside her friends without hesitation. The earth, in its quiet wisdom, had given Toph a gift, not just power but connection. And through her, Team Avatar came to understand that strength does not always roar. Sometimes it is simply the steady presence of someone who refuses to be moved, no matter how the world shifts around them. In the balance of the Avatar's journey, the element of earth revealed itself through many voices, each offering a different shape of strength. Toph's raw mastery, born of independence and honesty, showed the courage of standing firm against the world. King Bumi, with his eccentric wisdom, revealed that strength could be playful, unpredictable, and patient, waiting for the right moment to strike. And Suki, with her discipline and loyalty, embodied the truth that power lived not only in bending, but in devotion, training, and love. Together, they became living echoes of what Earth truly meant. For Earth was not just stone or soil, not merely walls and mountains. It was the ground beneath every step, the foundation that made journeys possible, the weight that anchored lives to the present moment. When Toph invented metal bending, breaking through the impossible barrier of steel, it was more than a triumph of skill. It was a message that the Earth's strength could not be limited, that even in the unyielding there was potential for change. Her discovery reshaped the future, opening doors for generations to come. Yet at its heart, it was simply Toph being herself, stubborn, determined, and unwilling to accept the boundaries others had set. King Bumi's laughter lingered as well, a reminder that age and eccentricity did not dim one's spirit. He stood as proof that wisdom was not always solemn, that joy and resilience could endure even through a century of war. His bond with Aang, rekindled after 100 years, was a reminder of the Earth's patience that true friendship, like stone, could endure the weight of time. And Suki, whose path was carved not by bending but by discipline, showed that love could be its own form of strength. Her loyalty to her warriors, her courage in battle, and her bond with Sokka reminded Team Avatar that the Earth's power was not always loud or grand. Sometimes it was simply the steady presence of someone who refused to waver, who stood her ground even when the world tried to push her down. For Aang, the lessons of Earth became some of the most valuable he carried. When he faced the storms of war, when the Fire Nation pressed upon him with overwhelming force, it was Earth that taught him to hold fast, to plant his feet, to breathe deeply, to remember that some challenges could not be avoided, only met with courage. The voices of Toph, Bumi, and Suki echoed in those moments, grounding him when the weight of destiny threatened to sweep him away. In the quiet, the essence of Earth was simple: to endure, to remain, to give foundation to all things. While air moved freely and water flowed gently, Earth held steady, offering a place to rest, to stand, to belong. It was the element of home, of roots, of permanence. And in the companionship of Toph, Bumi, and Suki, Aang and his friends discovered that home could be found not only in places, but in people, those who stand beside you, who ground you when everything else feels uncertain. So the story of Earth is not one of grandeur or glory, but of presence. It is in the stomp of Toph's foot as she bends the ground with unwavering certainty. It is in the echo of Bumi's laughter through the streets of Omashu. It is in the graceful movements of Suki and her warriors, masks painted, hearts steady. It is in the quiet knowledge that no matter how far one travels, the Earth will always be beneath one's feet, waiting, patient, eternal. And so, through these companions, the Avatar's journey was grounded. Their lessons, their love, their laughter, became the solid stones on which the path to peace was built. Just as mountains watch silently over valleys, so too did the Earth's presence hold the world steady, enduring, unbroken, timeless. If Earth was steady and water was gentle, fire was something else entirely, a force that burned, restless and alive, capable of both warmth and destruction. And no figure carried the weight of fire's duality more than Prince Zuko, a boy whose journey was shaped by both scar and shadow. Zuko's childhood began in privilege, the son of Fire Lord Ozai and Princess Ursa. He grew up within the royal palace, surrounded by grandeur, yet yearning for love that often felt out of reach. His mother was kind, her gentle words a balm to the boy's sensitive heart. But her presence vanished suddenly, leaving only questions and memories that haunted him in quiet moments. From his father, Zuko received not warmth but harshness, demands, and eventually exile. The scar that burned across his face was not just a mark of fire, but of pain. It was the result of an Agni Kai, a duel Zuko had never wished for, forced upon him by a father who valued power above compassion. When Zuko spoke out of turn in a war meeting, defending the lives of his soldiers rather than obeying without question, Ozai saw it as weakness. In the arena, the boy begged forgiveness, refusing to raise his hand against his own father. But Ozai's fire struck mercilessly, branding Zuko not only with flame but with shame. His honor was declared lost, and his only path to redemption was to capture the Avatar, a mission born of cruelty, a quest meant to send him chasing shadows. So began Zuko's exile, wandering the seas with his Uncle Iroh at his side. To the world, he was a banished prince, desperate, scarred, and consumed by a need to prove himself. Yet beneath his anger and stubbornness lived a boy who simply longed to be seen, to be accepted, to know that his worth was not measured by conquest or cruelty. His search for honor was less about titles and crowns, and more about finding the love he had lost. The fire within Zuko burned fiercely, but it was unstable, wavering between destruction and renewal. His temper flared often, his frustration spilling into storms of anger. He chased Aang across oceans and skies, convinced that capturing the Avatar would heal the wound within him. Yet every encounter left him emptier, the prize always just out of reach, the scar always present, reminding him that his pain could not be soothed by victory alone. Still, Zuko's journey was not one of fire alone. By his side traveled Uncle Iroh, a man whose presence was like warm tea on a cold morning. Iroh saw in Zuko not a failure, but a boy with potential, someone who needed patience, guidance, and love. Where Ozai had given only cruelty, Iroh gave wisdom and care. His gentle words and quiet lessons softened the edges of Zuko's rage, though the boy often resisted, too stubborn to see the truth immediately, yet slowly. As seasons turned and paths unfolded, Zuko's fire began to shift. For within him was not only the fire of pain, but the fire of resilience. His scar, once a mark of shame, began to symbolize survival, the proof that he had endured cruelty and yet remained. His exile, once a punishment, became the beginning of his true path, carrying him far from the palace walls and closer to the person he was meant to be. Zuko's story was never simple. He walked through shadows, stumbling, failing, and losing his way. But within those struggles lay the heart of fire, to burn, to fall, and to rise again from the ashes. On the decks of a rusted ship drifting across endless waters, the Banished Prince carried his burden. Zuko's eyes were sharp, always scanning the horizon, his voice clipped and urgent whenever news of the Avatar reached his ears. The ocean breeze carried with it not peace, but the weight of expectation, an unspoken pressure that whispered of a father's approval waiting at the end of the chase. Every sunrise was another reminder of his exile, every sunset another day of failure. Yet beside him stood Uncle Iroh, unhurried, calm, and forever gentle. Iroh's presence was a steady counterpoint to Zuko's storm. While Zuko burned with impatience, Iroh took time to admire the world around him. He would pause to sip tea, comment on the beauty of jasmine, or chuckle at small joys, reminding his nephew that life was not solely about conquest or honor. To Zuko, such moments seemed trivial, even frustrating. "How can you stop for tea when my destiny is slipping away?" he would protest. But beneath his irritation, Zuko was listening, and slowly the wisdom sank in. For Iroh was not only a retired general, but a man shaped by loss. His son, Lu Ten, had been taken by the cruelty of war, and Iroh carried that wound quietly, never pressing it upon Zuko, but letting it soften his perspective. He knew the cost of obsession, of letting anger and ambition consume the soul, and so he sought to guide Zuko away from the same path, to teach him the true strength was not in domination, but in understanding. Their journey across seas became more than a hunt. It became a quiet education. Each failure to capture the Avatar revealed another truth, that Zuko's fire was fueled by pain rather than balance. His bending flared erratically, his temper leading him into battles he was not ready to win. But slowly, under Iroh's guidance, he began to glimpse another way. Fire, Iroh reminded him, was life as much as destruction, the warmth of the sun, the light that guided, the spark that kept one alive. To bend fire was to carry responsibility, not just rage. And yet, Zuko resisted these lessons. His heart was restless, scarred by rejection. He wore his anger like armor, unwilling to set it down. At times, he disguised himself as the Blue Spirit, a silent figure in a mask, slipping through the night with dual swords flashing. In this hidden identity, Zuko's complexity revealed itself. When he freed Aang from captivity, it was not out of kindness, but necessity, and yet, in that act, something deeper stirred. He saw the Avatar not only as an enemy, but as a boy like himself, caught in currents larger than either of them could control. Still, Zuko's path wound through shadows. Every glimpse of compassion was followed by retreat into bitterness. Each kindness he showed was soon buried under his obsession with restoring honor. The struggle inside him grew louder, as though two fires burned at once, one of rage, the other of hope. Through it all, Iroh remained. He brewed tea in the quiet corners of villages, sang softly under the stars, and reminded his nephew that destiny was not something to chase, but something to discover. Though Zuko often turned away, pretending not to hear, the words lingered, like embers waiting for the right moment to ignite. The boy who believed himself lost was, in truth, being shaped by exile. His scar and his failures were not curses, but beginnings. Every ship that sailed without victory, every night spent in frustration, was slowly carving away the mask of anger, preparing him for a truth he could not yet accept, that his honor was not something his father could grant or take away. It was something he would have to find within himself. As time passed, Zuko's path grew heavier. His heart wavered between the lessons of Iroh and the echo of his father's voice. Somewhere deep inside he wanted peace, yet the shadow of shame pressed hard, whispering that he was nothing without Ozai's approval. This conflict grew sharper when his sister Azula stepped back into his life. Azula was everything Zuko was not: precise, confident, and terrifyingly gifted. Her fire burned blue, brighter and colder than anyone's, a mark of her rare skill and unshakable control. To the Fire Nation, she was a prodigy, admired and feared. To Zuko, she was both sister and rival, a figure whose words could wound more deeply than flame. Her return offered him a choice: to stand with Iroh in quiet defiance, or to follow her into the heart of the Fire Nation, where promises of restored honor gleamed like mirages. The weight of exile had left Zuko weary, vulnerable to the temptation of return. He longed to believe that his suffering could finally end, that the scar upon his face might no longer define him. Azula knew this longing well, and she used it like a weapon. Her words were sharp as blades, offering him belonging, whispering that together they could reclaim their place at Ozai's side. And though Iroh cautioned him, urging patience and truth, Zuko faltered. In Ba Sing Se, the city of walls and secrets, his crossroads became clear. There, among winding streets and hidden lives, Zuko glimpsed another way of being. For a brief moment, he found peace in simplicity, serving tea beside his uncle, living quietly as just another boy, no prince, no exile. The tea shop's warmth was unlike the throne room's fire, gentle, human, filled with laughter. It was here that Zuko began to taste the life he might have lived, a life not ruled by scars or shadows. But peace was fleeting. Azula's schemes wrapped around him, pulling him into the chaos of conquest. And when the time came to choose, Zuko betrayed the one soul who had never abandoned him. In the crystal chambers beneath Ba Sing Se, he raised his fire not against Azula, but against Aang and his companions. Iroh, heartbroken, was left behind, captured for standing by what was right. Zuko's choice burned not just in flames, but in silence, the silence of trust broken, of love refused. For a time, it seemed he had everything he once desired. He returned to the Fire Nation, hailed as a prince restored, a hero who had stood beside his sister in victory. His scar no longer marked a banished child, but a warrior reborn. Yet within him, unease stirred. Each day in the palace halls felt hollow. Every word of praise from his father carried an emptiness he could not ignore. He had gained the throne room's approval, but lost the warmth of the tea shop, the laughter of freedom, and the steady presence of his uncle's love. This was the shadow of fire to achieve what one thought was destiny, only to find that the flame consumed more than it gave. Zuko had chosen the path of ambition, yet his heart remained restless, his nights haunted by doubt. For the truth, like a buried ember, cannot be silenced forever. The halls of the Fire Nation Palace were lined with gold and banners, yet they offered Zuko no comfort. Every victory tasted of ash, every word of praise hollow in his ears. Though he had returned from exile, though his father welcomed him as a prince once more, the scar upon his face still burned not from fire, but from guilt. In quiet hours he thought of Iroh, imprisoned for standing by the truth, and he wondered if honor could truly be built upon betrayal. Night after night, the doubts grew louder. Zuko had sought his father's approval all his life, but standing within the palace, he saw the truth more clearly. Ozai's love was an illusion. His father's gaze held no warmth, only expectation, only the weight of conquest. It was not honor he had found, but chains disguised as glory. The turning point came like a storm when the world itself trembled beneath the comet's approach. Sozin's comet, with its promise of magnified fire, returned once again the same comet that had fueled the destruction of the Air Nomads. In its arrival, Zuko saw both the power of his nation and the peril of its path. He realized at last that standing beside Ozai meant becoming complicit in the destruction of balance itself. With trembling hands and a heart alight with clarity, Zuko chose a different path. He left behind the palace that had once defined him and sought out Aang and his companions, the very people he had hunted, the very souls he had fought against. Their eyes held suspicion, anger, and distrust. After all, how could they forgive the boy who had betrayed them, who had carried the Fire Nation's shadow across their journey? And yet Zuko spoke from the heart. His words were not polished nor grand, but they were true. He admitted his mistakes, his blindness, and the pain he had caused. More importantly, he offered not power but loyalty, vowing to help Aang master firebending so that the Avatar could face Ozai and end the war. It was not an easy path. Trust had to be earned, and Zuko had to prove, step by step, that his fire was no longer driven by rage, but by balance. Training alongside Aang, he rediscovered the deeper truth of firebending. With the guidance of the Sun Warriors, he learned that fire was not merely destruction, but life itself, the warmth of the sun, the heartbeat of existence, the flame that sustains. No longer did his bending flare wildly with anger. Instead, it pulsed with harmony, flowing with the rhythm of breath and the balance of the world. The most tender moment of his journey came not in battle, but in reunion. When Zuko finally approached Iroh, the man he had betrayed and abandoned, he expected fury, rejection, perhaps even silence. Instead, Iroh embraced him without hesitation, tears in his eyes, heart wide open. "I was never angry with you," his uncle whispered. "I was only sad that you lost your way." In that embrace, the weight Zuko had carried for years melted. For the first time, he understood that honor was not granted by crowns or thrones, but by love, forgiveness, and the courage to choose what is right. And so, when the final battle came, Zuko no longer fought as a prince chasing shadows, but as a young man who had chosen light. Side by side with Katara, he faced Azula not with hatred, but with resolve. Azula's fire blazed wild and desperate, her mind unraveling under the weight that perfection demanded. Zuko's flame, in contrast, stood steady, controlled, and calm. Where once he had been lost in the storm of his own anger, now he embodied the balance that fire could bring. Though he fell in the clash, Katara's strength ensured victory. Together they faced the broken figure of Azula, her blue fire sputtering into sobs. And in that moment, Zuko did not feel triumph, only sorrow for the sister who had been consumed by shadows he himself had escaped. When the war ended, the boy, who had once been a banished prince, stepped forward as Fire Lord, not to conquer, but to heal. His first words were promises of peace, a vow to rebuild the world that his nation had scarred. The scar upon his face remained, but it no longer marked shame. It was a reminder of the journey he had walked, from anger to compassion, from exile to home, from shadow to firelight. Zuko's story was never simply about a prince reclaiming his throne. It was about a boy learning that true honor lies not in approval or conquest, but in love, forgiveness, and the quiet strength of choosing what is right. His fire no longer consumed him. Instead, it guided him, a steady flame, warm and enduring, a light in the shadows. If Zuko's journey was one of searching for balance, his father's path was the opposite, a tale of fire untamed, ambition unbound, and shadows without mercy. Fire Lord Ozai stood as the embodiment of the Fire Nation's hunger for conquest. Where others saw the world's diversity as strength, Ozai saw weakness. To him, the only order worth building was an empire ruled by flame, with himself as its unchallenged center. His voice was measured, deep, and commanding, his presence enough to silence even the boldest generals. Ozai did not need to shout. His words carried the weight of absolute power. In his eyes, his children were not family, but instruments, shaped and sharpened to serve his purpose. Zuko's sensitivity he considered weakness, while Azula's precision he cherished as perfection. Azula was born with fire that burned brighter and hotter than most, flames so intense they glowed blue. From childhood she excelled in every skill, bending, strategy, cunning. She carried herself with grace, but wielded her gifts with cruelty, her laughter often sharp and unkind. To Ozai, she was the true heir, the child who would bring glory to his throne. He nurtured her ambition, fed her superiority, and in doing so, set her on a path where compassion had little room to grow. And so Azula became more than a princess. She became a weapon. Her bending was unmatched, her mind a labyrinth of strategies that few could untangle. Unlike Zuko, who wrestled with his heart, Azula embraced control over herself, her fire, and those around her. She gathered allies not through kindness, but through fear, weaving threads of manipulation so fine that few noticed they were caught until it was too late. Her circle reflected her power. Mai, quiet and sharp, fought not with bending but with daggers, her aim so precise it seemed effortless. She spoke little, but her presence was heavy with a detached calm that both unsettled and intrigued. Ty Lee, by contrast, was light and cheerful, a performer whose acrobatics dazzled the eye. Her chi-blocking strikes could render the strongest benders helpless in moments, a skill masked by her gentle smile. Together the three formed a dangerous trio, their bond stitched together by Azula's dominance. Yet even as her fire shone brighter, shadows stirred beneath. Azula's strength was undeniable, but it rested on a fragile foundation. The constant need to be perfect, the unrelenting pressure to never falter. Where Zuko stumbled and learned, Azula feared stumbling at all. For her, mistakes were not lessons, but cracks, and in her world, cracks were unacceptable. Her rise became swift, her victories resounding. She hunted the Avatar with relentless precision, turning every setback into another plan. At Ba Sing Se, she proved her mastery not only in bending but in deception. Disguised as the Earth King's allies, she infiltrated the city and turned it against itself. With a single strike of lightning, she brought Aang to the edge of death. The fall of the Earth Kingdom's greatest city was not achieved by armies alone, but by the sharp mind and cruel fire of one girl, barely more than 16. Wherever she walked, people trembled. She was the flame that consumed shadows, leaving only obedience in her wake. And yet, behind her golden crown and piercing stare, a quieter truth waited, hidden even from herself. For fire that burns too brightly cannot burn forever, and perfection, no matter how dazzling, comes at a cost. Not all shadows of the Fire Nation were born in palaces or carried crowns. Some were quieter, stitched into the lives of those who followed, each carrying their own burdens, their own stories. Around Azula's flame gathered companions who, in their own ways, mirrored the struggles of a nation caught between strength and fear. Mai was silence given form. With her calm voice and unblinking stare, she seemed untouched by emotion. Her sharp words delivered with the same precision as the knives she carried. She did not bend fire or command soldiers, but her aim was flawless, her movements graceful, her loyalty at first unquestioned. For Mai, the world was dull, drained of color, and perhaps it was this very emptiness that drew her to Azula's fire. To stand beside a princess of such brilliance gave shape to the stillness she felt inside. Yet her silence hid a heart that longed for something more, a quiet tenderness that surfaced in rare moments, especially in the presence of Zuko. Dai Li, by contrast, was light and laughter, a circus acrobat whose every step seemed to dance with joy. Her smile was wide, her voice soft and melodic, but beneath the performance lay a truth as sharp as her chi-blocking strikes. She had grown up in a family of sisters, all so alike that she had felt invisible, her individuality fading into sameness. It was only by bending her body in impossible ways, by dazzling crowds and disarming enemies, that she carved out her place in the world. Ty Lee's cheerfulness masked her desire to be seen, her fear of being forgotten. Azula's circle gave her that recognition, though it bound her in chains of fear disguised as friendship. Then there was Zhao, a man whose ambition burned hotter than his wisdom. An admiral of the Fire Nation Navy, he was a figure of arrogance and pride, convinced that his destiny was to carve his name into history. Zhao's fire was fierce but reckless, his plans bold but often flawed. When he sought to capture the Avatar, it was not merely for the glory of his nation, but for the immortality of his own reputation. His downfall came not from weakness, but from his refusal to see balance. In his attempt to slay the moon spirit, Zhao revealed the danger of unchecked ambition, that in trying to command the natural order, one risks unraveling it entirely. His defeat was not just a victory for Aang and his companions, but a warning of what happens when fire consumes without restraint. Together, these figures form the edges of the crown. Not rulers themselves, but essential pieces in the Fire Nation's story. They were the hands that carried out Azula's plans, the shadows that moved where the light of the throne could not reach. And yet, each carried a quiet ache, a fracture that Azula's dominance could never heal. Mai's silence grew heavier as her heart leaned toward compassion rather than cruelty. Ty Lee's laughter often rang hollow when weighed against the fear Azula inspired. Zhao's arrogance, once towering, ended in the quiet pull of ocean waves, swallowed by the very element he underestimated. Their stories revealed a truth often hidden behind banners and flames. The power does not rest only in crowns or thrones, but also in the choices of those who follow. And when those choices shift, when silence becomes defiance, when laughter becomes courage, when arrogance meets humility, even the strongest crown begins to crack. Azula's fire burned like no other, a searing blue flame that seemed untouchable. To the world she was flawless, every strike precise, every word calculated, every plan executed without hesitation. She carried herself like a queen long before she wore a crown, her steps deliberate, her gaze sharp. Few dared to challenge her, and fewer still could hope to win. But fire, no matter how bright, is not without weakness. Beneath the perfection Azula demanded of herself lay fear, not fear of enemies, but fear of falling short. In her world there was no room for mistakes. Ozai had praised her for her brilliance, for her cruelty, for the way she embodied the Empire's ruthless vision. And so she measured herself not by kindness or compassion, but by conquest. To stumble was to fail was to be unworthy, and to be unworthy was to lose the love she had spent her life chasing. At first the cracks were small, hidden beneath her triumphs. When Mai and Ty Lee stood beside her, she seemed invincible. Their presence gave her power, their loyalty reinforcing the illusion that she was surrounded by certainty. Yet even the strongest illusions cannot last forever. The breaking point came quietly, not in the roar of fire, but in the hush of betrayal. In a moment of courage, Mai chose to defy her saving Zuko at the boiling rock, standing against the girl she had once followed. "I guess you miscalculated," Mai said with calm defiance, her voice steady against the storm of Azula's fury. Ty Lee, too, revealed her true heart, striking against Azula to protect her friend, breaking the circle that had once been bound by fear. Their defiance cut deeper than any blade. For the first time, Azula's control faltered. Her laughter, once sharp and mocking, turned brittle, edged with desperation. She banished them, her voice trembling with rage, yet beneath it echoed something far more fragile: the fear of being left alone. From that moment on, her flame began to flicker. Paranoia crept into her eyes. Her once steady hands trembled when she reached for her crown. Mirrors became enemies, reflecting imperfections she could no longer ignore. Where she had once been surrounded by allies, she found herself in silence, her own thoughts louder than the cheers of victory. As the comet approached and her coronation neared, Azula's unraveling grew sharper. The perfection she had demanded of herself became unbearable, and in her solitude she turned against even those who remained. Servants were dismissed, guards cast out, until the palace echoed with emptiness. Her voice, once commanding, grew frantic. Her fire still burned blue, but it no longer felt like mastery. It felt like desperation, a flame trying to prove it still had control. In the final duel, the truth of her unraveling was laid bare. Facing Zuko and Katara, she fought with unmatched fury, every strike filled with the raw force of her crumbling mind. Lightning split the air, flames spun wild, but there was no balance, no calm precision. Her fire was chaos, brilliant, terrifying, but broken. When defeat came, it was not through the strength of her opponents alone, but through the weight of her own collapse. Bound in chains, her screams filled the air, not with anger alone, but with grief, fear, and the pain of a girl who had never been allowed to simply be human. Azula's story was not only of fire's brilliance, but of its fragility. She was a crown of flame, dazzling and powerful, but built on foundations too brittle to endure. Her unraveling was a reminder that perfection, when demanded without compassion, burns until there is nothing left but ash. While Azula's fire unraveled in the palace halls, Another blaze consumed the sky. Sozin's comet, streaking red across the heavens, poured its power into the Fire Nation, granting firebenders strength beyond measure. And in its glow stood Fire Lord Ozai, cloaked in armor, declaring himself the Phoenix King, a ruler not content with a single nation, but determined to scorch the world into submission. Ozai's fire was terrifying in its scope. Where Azula's blue flames had dazzled, his firestorms roared like oceans of flame, devouring forests, mountains, and skies. He was the embodiment of conquest, ambition without limit, compassion without trace. For years he had been his children to his will, treating them as tools, stripping away softness, demanding perfection. Now, with the comet's power burning through him, he sought to bend the very world to the same merciless vision. But where his flames sought only destruction, another stood to oppose him. Aang, the Avatar, carrying the weight of all four nations, the whisper of past lives, and the hope of a future free from tyranny. Their battles shook the earth, air, water, and fire alike. Ozai hurled his power with unrelenting force, firestorms tearing the land, lightning splitting the sky. Yet Aang, steady and calm, answered not with rage, but with balance. When the moment came, Aang could have ended Ozai as the Fire Nation itself had once ended the Air Nomads. But instead he chose a different path. With the Avatar state flowing through him, he reached beyond fire, beyond conquest, beyond the endless cycle of destruction. He bent Ozai's power away, stripping him of fire-bending altogether. The man who had once towered as the Phoenix King fell silent, his flames extinguished, left only as a shadow of the force he had once been. The crown of fire, once a symbol of fear, no longer rested with Ozai. It no longer belonged to Azula, whose fire had consumed itself in desperation. Instead it passed to Zuko, the boy once scarred, once banished, once lost in shadows. His coronation was not marked by firestorms or grand declarations, but by vows spoken in humility, to restore peace, to heal what had been broken, to guide the Fire Nation with compassion rather than fear. When Zuko stood before his people, his scar still visible, his posture steady, he did not look like the kings of old. He looked like something new, a leader shaped not by conquest, but by struggle, not by perfection, but by acceptance. The crown rested lightly upon his head, not as a weight of ambition, but as a promise. The contrast could not have been greater. Where Ozai had sought to burn the world into obedience, Zuko sought to rebuild it in harmony. Where Azula had demanded perfection, Zuko embraced imperfection as truth. Where fire had once meant fear, now it could mean warmth, guidance, and renewal. And so the crown of fire changed meaning. No longer a symbol of domination, it became a reminder of what had been lost and what could be restored. Zuko's flame was not the blinding blaze of conquest, nor the desperate flicker of perfection. It was a steady light, gentle yet enduring, strong enough to guide his nation toward peace. Not all journeys are carried on the strength of human hands alone. In the wide, breathing world of the Avatar, spirits and companions walked quietly beside its heroes, carrying burdens, guiding choices, and reminding even the strongest that no one walks their path in isolation. For Aang, that reminder came in the shape of a sky bison, a gentle giant with fur like snow and eyes filled with patience. Appa was more than a mount, more than a creature bound by reins. He was Aang's oldest friend, a bond born long before the fall of the Air Nomads. Together they had trained under the open skies, children of the wind, playful and free. When Aang awoke from his century-long slumber, It was Appa's presence that anchored him, a steady constant in a world that had shifted beyond recognition. Appa carried not just Aang, but all who traveled with him. Through storm and desert, across oceans and mountains, his strength never faltered. In the silence of the night sky, when the stars stretched endlessly, Appa's wings beat like the heartbeat of the group, a reminder that no matter how lost they felt, they were never without a home. Yet even this loyal spirit of the skies knew suffering. Torn from his companions in Ba Sing Se, Appa wandered through forests and plains, enduring cruelty, loneliness, and fear. His journey was a mirror of Aang's own grief, a test of resilience. And when they were finally reunited, the moment was more than relief. It was the return of a piece of Aang's soul. To see Appa again was to remember that love could endure distance, that bonds could stretch across pain and remain unbroken. Beside Appa fluttered another presence, smaller but no less significant, Momo, the winged lemur, who found his way into Aang's heart by chance. Mischievous and light, Momo was laughter in moments of heaviness, a creature of curiosity and play. He did not fight in battles nor wield great power, but his gentle presence softened the edges of sorrow. He reminded the group of innocence, of joy found in the smallest acts of fruit stolen, a curious gaze, the warmth of fur curled beside a sleeping friend. Together, Appa and Momo were not just companions, they were guardians of the group's spirit. When words failed, when exhaustion pressed too heavily, their quiet companionship spoke of comfort. They belonged not as symbols of power, but as reminders of love, loyalty, and the simple beauty of being cared for. But beyond flesh and fur, there were guides of another kind, the spirits that whispered through unseen worlds. Among them stood Avatar Roku, Aang's predecessor, a flame of wisdom carried across time. Roku was both mentor and shadow, a reminder of choices made and burdens carried. His story was one of regret, of friendship with Fire Lord Sozin, that twisted into catastrophe, of warnings ignored, of a war that might have been prevented. Yet even in regret, Roku stood by Aang, not as a judge, but as a guide. He offered counsel in moments of doubt, a steady hand reaching across lifetimes to remind Aang that the Avatar's duty was not carried alone. His words were not always comforting, but they were honest, shaped by experience, by mistakes, and by the hope that the next Avatar might find balance where he could not. Avatar Roku's presence in Aang's journey was more than just memory. He was a living bridge between past and present, a voice carried across generations. In the quiet of temples, in the hush of firelight, Roku appeared with the patience of one who had walked the same path, bearing the same weight. His story was not without shadows. As a young man, Roku had been gifted with everything power, wisdom, and even friendship with the future Fire Lord, Sozin. But it was that friendship, left unchecked, that became his greatest failure. Roku saw Sozin's ambition grow, like fire spreading through dry grass. He warned, he pleaded, but he hesitated when the moment of decision came. Perhaps it was love for an old friend, perhaps hope that Sozin could be changed. But Roku's delay gave birth to tragedy. When his island home erupted in fire and ash, it was Sozin who first appeared to help him. Yet when the moment came to save him, Sozin chose power over compassion, leaving Roku to perish. And with his death, the world fell into imbalance, setting the stage for a century of war. It was this story, carried in Roku's steady voice, that became a lesson to Aang, that hesitation can be as dangerous as aggression, and that mercy without wisdom can cost the world dearly. Roku's guidance was not always easy to hear, but it was necessary, a reminder that the Avatar's duty was not only to people, but to history itself. Beyond Roku's teachings lay the greater expanse of the spirit world, a place where reality softened, where shadows and light took new shapes, and where every tree and stream seemed alive with the quiet whispers. To mortals it was a realm of mystery, one footstep away yet unreachable without guidance. For Aang, it was both a sanctuary and a trial. In the spirit world, he discovered that balance was not only about bending elements, but about honoring forces unseen. Spirits could be gentle, protectors of rivers, forests, and skies. They could also be fierce, their wrath rising when humans forgot respect. The spirit world reminded Aang that every action echoed beyond what eyes could see, that the world was more than stone and flame. It was breath, memory, and dream. Among the most haunting guides Aang encountered was Wan Shitong, the great owl who ruled over an endless library buried beneath desert sands. His form was vast, feathers dark as ink, eyes gleaming with ancient wisdom. He claimed to know 10,000 things and more, storing knowledge in scrolls and tomes gathered from every corner of the world. To enter his library was to step into eternity itself, surrounded by the quiet turning of pages, the weight of forgotten truths. But Wan Shitong was no gentle librarian. He was stern, almost cold, believing knowledge belonged not to mortals who twisted it for war, but to the spirits who preserve balance. To him, humans were greedy, always seeking power rather than wisdom. And when Aang and his companions entered, his suspicion grew heavier with every word. Yet within those shelves, truths were revealed, the secret of Sozin's comet, the knowledge that gave the Fire Nation its devastating strength. The library was not merely a place of learning, but a reminder of the cost of knowledge, of how wisdom can be weaponized when balance is forgotten. Wan Shitong's anger when he discovered their purpose was not without reason. To him, mortals had once again come to steal truths for war, and so the library sank deeper into the desert, swallowed by shadows, leaving only echoes of what had been seen. Still, the encounter left its mark on Aang and his friends. Knowledge was as powerful as bending a force that could save as much as it could destroy. The spirit world, through Roku, through Wan Shitong, through countless whispers in the trees and rivers, pressed one truth upon them. The Avatar's journey was not simply about mastering elements, but about understanding the unseen threads that tied the world together. The spirit world was not always gentle, nor always kind. It was a reflection of balance, and when that balance was broken, its spirits became mirrors of human fault. Aang, in his journey, discovered that to walk among spirits was to step into truths both unsettling and profound. One of the first spirits he encountered was He Bai, the black and white panda spirit who once watched over a quiet forest. When the forest was burned by the Fire Nation, He Bai's grief twisted him. He no longer appeared as a gentle guardian, but as a raging beast, lashing out at those who crossed his path. Villagers cowered in fear, believing only malice remained within him. But in truth, He Bai's anger was sorrow, the cry of nature scarred by war. It was Aang's compassion, his ability to listen, that calmed the spirit. In the end, He Bai returned to his true form, reminding both mortals and spirits alike that destruction leaves wounds deeper than fire, but healing is always possible. Yet not every spirit could be soothed so easily. In the shadowed depths of the spirit world, Aang faced one of the most fearsome beings to ever dwell there, Ko, the Face Stealer. Ancient, serpentine, and terrifyingly still, Ko prowled through the gloom with a cruel power, the ability to steal the face of anyone who showed emotion in his presence. Countless visages, frozen in expressions of fear or sorrow, adorned his body like trophies. When Aang sought Ko's knowledge, he had to walk with absolute calm, every heartbeat steady, every breath measured. The tension was suffocating, for one flicker of fear, one hint of anger, could mean losing his very identity. Yet Ko was not chaos for its own sake. He embodied the lesson that control was as much a part of balance as compassion. To survive his gaze, Aang had to master stillness, to show that even in the presence of terror, the Avatar could remain steady. Ko's whispers revealed truths about the moon spirit and the ocean spirit, spirits who held sway over tides and balance itself. His knowledge, like Wan Shutong's, was bound in conditions freely given, yet always carrying a weight. For the spirits did not exist to comfort humans. They existed to remind them that the world was greater than their conflicts. These encounters shaped Aang's understanding of what it meant to be Avatar. The spirits were not simply guides or allies. They were teachers, each one carrying lessons that words alone could not provide. Heibai showed him the grief of the natural world, demanding respect for what humans destroyed. Ko showed him the necessity of discipline, of stillness in the face of fear. And through them, Aang came to see that bending the elements was only half of his task. The greater challenge was to bend the heart to remain compassionate in sorrow, calm in terror, and wise in moments of choice. The spirit world itself was a reflection of the human world. Its rivers and forests responded to how humans treated them. Its guardians shifted with the balance of peace and destruction. To step into that realm was to see the consequences of mortal hands laid bare, unshielded by excuses or power. It was a world of mirrors, and in those mirrors Aang saw both the failures of the past and the hopes of what could be mended. Among the many spirits that touched the mortal world, few were as vital as Tui and La the moon and the ocean. They lived in eternal dance, circling each other in a gentle push and pull, balance embodied in motion. Their home lay in the Northern Water Tribe, in the sacred oasis where koi fish swam side by side, their forms simple yet filled with cosmic weight. Aang and his companions came to know their power in a time of war. The Fire Nation, in its hunger to dominate, sought to sever the world's balance at its root. Admiral Zhao, ruthless and blind to consequence, set his eyes upon the moon spirit. To him it was not sacred, but a weakness to be destroyed. And when his strike fell, the world itself trembled. The skies dimmed, waterbenders lost their strength, and grief rippled through the oceans. Yet from that sorrow rose sacrifice. Princess Yue, blessed since birth by the moon spirit's touch, gave her life to restore what had been taken. She stepped into the water, her body dissolving into light, her spirit ascending to take Tui's place. The moon returned, its glow soft across the sea, and the balance of water and fire was preserved. Yue's story became a reminder that the bond between humans and spirits was not distant, but intimate. They lived in each other's breath, each other's choices, each other's sacrifices. Another spirit walked among mortals in more humble ways, the Painted Lady. In a struggling village along the Fire Nation's rivers, suffering from poisoned waters and neglect, she appeared in whispers and mist. Some believed her a legend, others a savior. Yet it was not only the spirit who brought aid. Katara, moved by the villagers' pain, disguised herself as the Painted Lady, bringing food, healing, and hope. In her compassion, the spirit's presence seemed to merge with her own. Whether the Painted Lady truly walked beside Katara, or whether the human heart simply echoed the spirit's will, the result was the same. Kindness restored strength where despair had taken root. The Painted Lady's tale showed that mortals, too, could carry the spirit of compassion, becoming vessels of balance when the world most needed it. Tui Layue, the Painted Lady. They were reminders that the line between human and spirit was not as sharp as it seemed. The spirits were not distant gods ruling from unreachable skies. They were threads woven into every part of life, into rivers, into moons, into choices made with love or cruelty. When humans honored that bond, harmony blossomed. When they severed it, sorrow followed. To Aang, these encounters deepened the truth of his duty. To be Avatar was not to stand above the world, but within it, to honor not only the bending of elements, but the quiet voices of spirits, rivers, and skies. The spirits did not demand worship, but respect. They did not always offer kindness, but they always reflected truth. And in those truths, Aang saw the path of balance more clearly than in any battle fought with fists or flame. At the edges of memory, older than nations, older even than the Avatar cycle itself, lived beings so ancient that mortals spoke of them only in hushed legends, the lion turtles. Great, towering creatures with shells like mountains and eyes that carried the calm weight of eternity. Long before bending became a skill tied to people, it was the lion turtles who granted the gift of bending to humankind. To them, it was not a weapon, but a sacred trust, something offered only when balance required it. When Aang faced his greatest trial, it was a lion turtle who appeared to him, rising from the sea like a living island. Its voice was slow, vast, echoing with the patience of ages. To Aang, who struggled with the question of how to defeat Fire Lord Ozai without betraying his vow of nonviolence, the lion turtle offered more than comfort, it offered understanding. From its wisdom came the teaching of energy bending, a practice older than all elemental bending, a power that touched the very essence of life. It was not fire or water, not earth or air, but the bending of the spirit itself. To wield it required balance deeper than technique, strength greater than muscle. It required purity of heart, calmness of soul, and the willingness to carry another's destiny in one's hands. Through the lion turtle, Aang learned that victory need not mean destruction. Strength could take the form of restraint, of choosing preservation over ruin. In that ancient presence, Aang found the path that allowed him to remain true to himself even when the world demanded otherwise. The lion turtle was not simply a guide, it was a reminder that the oldest wisdoms are not about conquest, but about harmony. When Aang knelt before Ozai, energy bending flowing through his body, it was the lion turtle's lesson that carried him. He reached into the core of fire's fury and bent it into silence, stripping away Ozai's bending, not with anger, but with balance. This act was not merely a victory for the Avatar. It was the living proof that the wisdom of spirits could guide humanity into gentler futures. The lion turtle's role in Aang's story echoed the truth shown again and again through Appa, Momo, Roku, Heibai, Yue, and the Painted Lady. No journey is carried alone. Companions take many forms, friends with laughter in their eyes, spirits who whisper through forests, ancient beings who rise from the depths. Together, they remind mortals that life is a tapestry, and every thread matters. As Aang grew, so too did his understanding of what it meant to be Avatar. He was not a solitary savior. He was a bridge between humans and spirits, between the past and the present, between despair and hope. And it was his companions, both mortal and eternal, who made that bridge strong enough to carry the world. Good night.